Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the musician-songwriter Craig Wedren, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry. Member of Shudder to Think, who have been around since the late 80s, had a slight period of hibernation, but have recently done a few live dates, and there are plans for new material and more activity later on in the year and beyond. So if you're listening to this is 2025, so they are very active again. And also Craig has recently released an album, a solo album titled The Dream Dreaming, which is available from all good record shops and probably on download as well. I will put a link to his website in the notes that you'll be able to click on and find out more information. But this is the interview, so you can find out about that, this and all sorts of stuff. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Craig, it's over to you.
So I grew up in I was born in New York City, but very quickly absconded to Cleveland, Ohio, which is where my parents were originally from. And so it was the Midwest, and from the 50s until I would say, let's say the late 70s, certainly maybe early 80s, Cleveland was really a hotbed because it was truly the Midwest, or considered the Midwest by the bi-coastal music industry, yes. Right? They would sort of throw everything at Cleveland to see what sticks. So we would get a really wide range of music, which I didn't realize, except in retrospect, that most places weren't getting, like, you know, David Johansen's first solo album on mainstream FM radio, right? Just little interesting off the beaten path characters like that, or even Bruce Springsteen, when he was just starting, kind of broke first in Cleveland. So it was this very passionate music town, where the term rock and roll was actually invented by this DJ Alan Freed, who was a Cleveland DJ. Yes. So it's really, again, you don't realize what's interesting or unusual or unique about where you grow up, because it's the air you breathe. But it turns out, in retrospect, we were, and I'm 55, so I was born in 69.
Yes.
So, you know, for me, it was very clear from a very young age that music was my total jam. My mom had a great ear for the radio. She loved pop music. She loved rock music, whatever was on, classic rock at the time. She liked musicals, and she loved opera, right? My grandpa loved opera. My dad, who was a little bit older than my mom, was a big, like, swing, big band, and early rock and roll R&B guy. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of getting really good music, like not super obscure music, but just really good music. Thank you so much.
Yes. I think, does Cleveland get mentioned in Spinal Tap? Is it one of those?
Yeah, hello, Cleveland.
Oh, right.
yeah. Where they get lost in the labyrinth.
Right. So that's where we all remember the Cleveland moment.
So I was getting good music from everywhere, not really realizing it, and just singing along to the radio and having that very, very almost mimic, sponge-like relationship to it. And I suppose it was around, I don't know, maybe 8 years old, where I started becoming conscious that music was a thing that people did.
Yeah.
And for me, at the time, it was my mom's Elton John records, right? And Kiss was huge for me, because I was super into superheroes, and I was super into monsters, and I was super into, like, heavy, catchy, melodic music. And I wouldn't have been aware of it at the time, but I was gravitating toward glam, right? So like you said, like The Sweet and T-Rex and you know, even some
did Gary Glitter come over?
Yeah.
Did you
Sure.
sort of...
I mean, we had the couple hits, Rock and Roll,
Yes.
Rock and Roll Part 2, and maybe Do You Want to Touch Me? But that was probably more through Joan Jett that I heard that, her cover of
Right.
it. Because I was just like that perfect couple few years younger than you, where I would
Yes.
have gotten the kind of second wave a little bit.
And were the Bay City Rollers on your radar as well at that stage?
Yeah, the pop end of it, like Bay City Rollers, Suzi Quatro, like a little bit of Suzi Quatro. But it was all also mixing in just with classic rock. Boston.
Did you have Pete Frampton Comes Live in the album in the house?
Yeah. Peter Frampton Comes Alive was huge.
Yes.
So all this was coming through, and then the in 1978 or 77, the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack hit, and it was the same year as the movie Grease.
Yes.
So it was this total hodgepodge. We would get just the tip of the iceberg of 77 first wave British punk, right? So teeny bit of the Clash, teeny bit of Sex Pistols, teeny bit of, on our side of the pond, Ramones, right? We would start here. For me, it was like 1979 was the year that it felt like music moved into our generation, because on the radio, you had Heart of Glass, you had Brass in Pocket, you had
what about Joe Jackson or Elvis Costello?
Jackson, that was exactly what I got. Is she really going out with him? Right, so this was all 1979. That song, Switch into Glide by the Kings, who were like this Canadian, I think, sort of power pop band. Even like Cheap Trick, like things were starting to sort of...
Live at Budokan was a great album.
Amazing record. The Cars, obviously, were like huge entryway for me. So it was right around then that my friends' sort of older brothers or cool cousins would have like a copy of Nevermind the Bollocks or the Clash, or the first Damned record or something like that. So it was starting to seep in, and we're like, wait a minute, there's something happening out there. And then I would say by the time we were 11 or 12, it was just full tilt punk and new wave and post-punk all the time.
Did you have any older brothers or sisters that gave you any
No, but I had friends. I had friends who had the older brothers and older sisters who were getting handed down, like, whatever it was, like the first Psychic TV record or The Residents or whatever it was. And because we were in Cleveland and we weren't cool, or we just weren't cool or snobby,
right,
like LA or New York or even DC was. So it was all fair game.
Yes,
so we
absolutely.
were listening to Journey and the Dead Kennedys and anything that came out on 4AD.
Boston.
Yeah, and Boston. And so basically, like, the first cover bands that I was in like 7th grade reflected that. We would do Anarchy in the UK and, I don't know, Clash City Rockers, and then we would do Def Leppard or whatever. It was very mishmash.
And you mentioned a bit earlier Elton John. Was that, I think it was Mum's collection, this was. Which was the Elton John album that she had?
It was I want to say, it was the sort of, she had a couple.
Did she have Goodbye Yellow Brick Road?
She had Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Captain Fantastic, and like, what's it called? Connection.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It's like sort of a, maybe it's not Connection.
There was the Don't Shoot Me album.
Yeah, it wasn't Don't Shoot Me, I'm just the piano player. It was definitely his greatest hits.
Right. Because actually, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, my brother had that. I had the older brother who was 7 years older, and he had he was very prog rock period, but he did have sort of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, and then he had a few other ones like Sergeant Pepper and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which I was kind of really drawn to because the variety of songs on those two albums, which had no critical awareness, because let's face it, the Beatles had only just broken up. So we were listening to Band on the Run and some John Lennon solo albums, which were fascinating as well. But the Beatles were like, they were just gone. That was just
Suddenly.
another decade, another era. It was almost like Elvis. It was like they're just old
done.
people.
It was over.
Which was very bizarre when you think about it now. But yeah, the sort of the variety of songs that Elton did on that album was just stunning.
And I think that really spoke to me because, I wouldn't have been aware of it at the time, but it turns out I just love songwriting and songcraft, right? And he was such a beautiful songwriter for a long time.
Yes.
And so, and I think I got that from my mom. I think I got sort of like the full tilt rock and roll side from my dad, who he didn't care about a deep lyric. He just wanted to tap his toes and like shake,
Yes.
But my mom seemed to tend toward more, early 70s singer-songwriter Eastaugh, Jim Croce, Elton John.
Was it James Taylor and Carole King and Joni Mitchell as well?
Yeah, Carole King. I still think I have my mom's Cosmic Tapestry.
Classic.
I have like her first Doors record. I just absconded with all of her stuff.
Yes.
And my dad's. I have all my dad's like Frank Sinatra records and Keely Smith records and whatever it is.
So in 82, you hit 13, the teenage years. At that stage, had you bought your first single and first album at this point?
Well, for sure I had. I don't remember what the first single or album I bought was, but I remember asking my Aunt Marlene for Hanukkah one year to get me, I don't know if it was the first or second Ozzy Osbourne solo record.
Oh, right.
But it was one where he's just covered in, I definitely tended toward the theatrical.
Yes.
And sort of flamboyant, so I would have been an Alice Cooper kid too.
Brilliant.
And I was really into Sabbath, but really Ozzy's first couple solo records really hit me and all of my friends, right? He's covered in blood. It's ghoulish, it's vampiric, it's super catchy, and it's super heavy.
Yes.
Right? So I remember my Aunt Marlene giving it to me and being like, I think this was the record that you asked for. Please don't ever ask me for this again. This is how much I love you.
They gave me a weird, yes, they must have really been confused in the record shop when she asked for it.
And then actually, you know what? I think the other first one was, I remember going downtown in Cleveland to have lunch with my grandpa Elmer, and there was a record store right near his office building, and we went into it. He's like, I'll buy you a record. Okay, great. And I remember asking for the first Plasmatics record.
Right,
Plasmatics?
Wendy. Yes.
And so that obviously checked all the boxes for me because it was theatrical, it was punk, it was heavy metal, it was over the top and flamboyant, and it was pretty
pornographic.
Catchy. A little bit pornographic, and I was 12 or however old I was. So, I think those were some of the things that were happening then. Those are the first two records I remember asking family members to buy for me. And then I remember for my bar mitzvah, but this was already like 82, 83. So my friends and my tastes were already starting to get a little deeper and more eclectic. And MTV was on.
Oh, God, of course, yes.
So the first wave of MTV only had like new wave and post-punk bands.
And a lot of British new romantics.
A lot of British new romantic stuff.
Because they made videos, and they were like, have you got any videos? Yes, A Flock of Seagulls becomes big.
Or Bowie, or sort of like Berlin period Bowie stuff. So
yes, Let's Dance would have been right in there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I remember my mom took me out. She was like, let's fill the jukebox at the, video arcade where I was having my party, my bar mitzvah party, with singles. So I just remember, I still have the singles from my bar mitzvah. So it would have been like, I Got You by Split Enz, right?
Nice.
Every Day I Write the Book, I think.
Oh,
Elvis
Elvis.
Costello.
God,
Yeah.
marvelous.
And what were the other ones from there? Or no, maybe it was One Step Ahead by Split Enz. Such a beautiful song. There was a Madness song in there. I don't remember quite what it was. We're starting to get into like a little bit of two-tone, and ska was crawling over, sort of dropping into our laps. Some specials, things like that. It was
We
really
had the specials, the beat, and yes,
Oh yeah, there was some
Madness.
English beat in there for sure.
Amazing. Yes, I mean, it was also, I don't know what Cleveland was like, but it was very tribal during the 80s as well. So, to be honest, if you liked heavy metal, which was like Status Quo, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, you couldn't be seen to also be a mod, which was the, two-tone movement. It was the Leather Jacket Boys on their motorbikes were very angry about that sort of
I
stuff.
think there were too few misfits in Cleveland, in the suburbs of Cleveland, that anybody could afford to uh, other anybody else. So if you were hardcore, you were hanging out with metal kids, and you were hanging out with ska kids, and you were probably hanging out with skinheads, so long as they weren't Nazis, and they were hanging out with the rockabilly people who were hanging out with the goth people, because
Right.
there were only about 20 of us total. It
Yes.
wasn't until I moved to DC where I started really, really seeing the tribes. Um,
Yes.
because in Cleveland, any one of those sort of out group kids um, would get their asses kicked at like a sort of normie party, like high school party. So we
Yes.
would band together just in sort of opposition to the mainstream.
Yeah, and I guess at that time we also had those kind of films from John Waters and people like
Yeah.
that. Being a bit freaky or enjoying that kind of stuff was always quite appealing, wasn't it, during the
Yeah, John
80s?
Waters, or even just the Rocky Horror crowd,
Oh,
right?
yes.
It's like all of those people would have been going to Rocky Horror in this area called Coventry, which was sort of the counterculture, one block in Cleveland.
Yes.
Radically different from like, when if we would take a family trip um, and spend a few days in London, and it was like, for me, it was like manna from heaven, right? To be able to like sneak into the 100 Club, something like that. See, who did I go see at 100 Club? It was like 999 or GBH or something. And I felt like I died and gone to heaven, even though like the sort of, it was really only like huffing fumes from the thing that I loved, the sort of
Yes.
77 to 79, by
So
the
had you
mid 80s.
entered a fashion period during the early to mid 80s? Had you started to sort of develop quite
Oh,
a style?
yes. Oh, yes. It was very kind of, I would say, like you said, sort of new romantic, post-punk, little goth. Definitely a lot of like John Lydon and sort of Vivienne Westwood, but
Right.
shot through the malls of Cleveland, which you can imagine was sketchy at best.
Yes. And during
Um,
that period, that marvelous moment, sort of 83, I think you're
mhm.
about 12. I don't know, God. Yes, you'd have been about 14, 13, 14.
Yeah.
The big band for me during the 80s, one of them, is the Smiths, indie pop. The Smiths come
Huge.
along,
Yeah.
and for 5 years, they are kind of quite, they're there in your face, a bit like quite a
They
few
just,
artists
they
at that
just,
point, but they kind of represented so much. Did that kind of English, kind of like The Cure, The Cult, The Mission, The Smiths, did they come onto your radar at this
oh, of
point?
course. Yeah. The Cure was and remains huge for me and a lot of my friends. And the Cult, the Smiths, really changed my music in particular, because I was always like a James Honeyman Scott type guitar. I always gravitated toward that like melodic,
Yes.
chimey, sort of complex, but beautiful. Like again, very songcrafty, which Johnny Marr, I feel, just really took and ran with and kind of brought it to the next level on, at least during the first few Smiths record,
Yes.
before it got a little more power chordy toward the end. That first Smiths record, which there were two bands, like, so in 1982, I remember visiting my dad in DC for the summer, and going to the local record store there, and I felt really embarrassed because everybody there was much cooler than I was, and I just went up to the front, and I was like, "Hi, do you have any punk cassettes?" and the very sweet, probably only 2 or 3 years older than me, clerk behind the counter took pity on me and was like, "Try this, sweetheart. Here's the Dead Kennedys,
Right.
and here's a band called X, who are, in my opinion, one of the great all-time bands from Los Angeles."
Yes.
And I remember going home with those cassettes, and immediately I understood Dead Kennedys. It was great for a 12-year-old boy. And I remember listening to the X record and being like, I don't really understand this. I need to keep listening to it. And by the end of the summer, they had switched where X was my life.
Right.
And Dead Kennedys was like, oh, this is really good, but it's sort of cute, whatever. And I remember then when I was 14, I was 14, I guess. When did Smith's first record come out? 84, 83?
So I think 83 was that first album, which was produced by John Porter, and that was the one with, those records. I don't know, the one
Real
about
Around the
Moore's,
Fountain and
and the Moore's Murderers one.
Yeah.
I mean, the production is always been a little bit dull, and then they bring out that sort of John Peel session one, the Hateful of Hollow, which had all the Maidavale recordings that they did, and then from there it starts to change quite a lot. There was Meet Is Murder,
sure,
and then there was The Queen Is Dead, and then Strange Ways, Here We Come, and then there was another a collection of stuff as well.
Louder Than Bombs, is that?
Yeah, and the one with the kind of the guys at the fairground, which I really liked, which was probably at 86. But I
remember my friend Matt Fields, who was like he was sort of the one with the really cool mom who would like take us to see, Screaming Jay Hawkins and Violent Femmes or whoever was coming
God, you
through.
saw Screaming Jay? Jesus.
Yeah, it was unreal. And she took us to go see X and the Replacements, right? So it was like she was the cool mom, had a great record collection, and he had like really cool older cousins who had great records too. So a lot of like sort of 70s prog stuff like Art Bears and Soft Machine and things like that. So we were getting fed. We had a really good drip of great music, and he before I went to summer camp that year, 83, whatever it was, he gave me this cassette. I remember it so well. It was one of those little red BASF cassettes, and on one side was the Smiths. I don't even remember what was on the other side. And like that X record, Wild Gift, that I'd gotten in DC when I was 12, I listened to the first Smiths record and I was like, I don't totally understand what I'm listening to, but I can't stop listening to it. And I remember the moment where it clicked. I remember where I was. I remember what the light was like. I was wearing my little Walkman, my little orange Walkman headphones.
Excellent.
And I was in the back of a van, coming from or going to some sort of bunk field trip. And the light was pouring through, and I was just lying there listening to it. And suddenly, in particular, the guitar parts just absolutely changed my life, changed my playing, changed the way I listen to music, changed the way I play music. I still think of it as more James Honeyman Scott-ish, but there's definitely a lot of Johnny Marr in there, and a lot of Keith Levine.
Right, good old
kind
Keith.
of in the.
Did you listen to people like John McGeoch or John Kay?
Yes, but I wasn't really aware of it. So John McGeoch was in Magazine and the Susie?
Yeah.
For a minute?
Oh, yes, probably. And then John McKay was in Susie, and then he gets kicked out and does the solo stuff. So he's
maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I wouldn't have been aware of individual, we were obsessed with Susie. She was like a total, I wanted to be Susie, just like everybody did.
A goddess, really.
Yeah, a goddess. But but I wouldn't have really been aware, except maybe a budgie, of like the players in the
Yes.
Banshees until Robert Smith was in it for a minute.
Yes. Totally.
Yeah, it was just all a big smush of, sort of un unreachable, untouchable, unassailable, larger than life characters like the Susies and the
I know. Well, they had a
Johnnies.
mysterious air of like, I mean, they were like Hollywood divas, weren't they? You
Mhm.
know, but with a sort of goths, you know.
Yeah, I mean for me that's what Ixine was like, the American version of it from the band X. So there was like this dual sort of Susie Ixine thing, and my old band Shudder to Think just recently started playing again, and
Yes.
and we just played like just two little kind of friends and family sets the other day because it was just so we just wanted to share it, and I was thinking about it as we were playing that there's so much Susie still in my vocal style, and so much Ozzy. Susie, Ozzy. I know it's a strange combination. And there's somebody else I was thinking. I was like, wow, they're just still. Oh, and Rick Ocasek from the Cars.
Oh,
No,
fantastic. Well, you know, I mean, you can't really go wrong with that kind of
no, yeah, with
level,
that.
can you? So when you got to sort of 15, no, 16, which was 1985, God, I'm
Yeah,
doing the maths here, aren't I?
I
Did
know.
you
I'm
do you
impressed.
leave do you leave school at this stage, or do you stay on to college and
No, well,
continue?
so here in America, college is 18. So I was still, I was in Cleveland. I left Cleveland when I was 16 and moved to Washington, D.C., which is where my dad was. It was a
Yes.
very, very rich, um, thriving punk and, I don't know, sort of proto-alternative scene happening there with like Minor Threat and Fugazi and Rites of Spring and Bad Brains. Very hardcore oriented, like American hardcore punk
Yes.
oriented. But it was all starting to get more. It was starting to open up. People were the kids who had been in the sort of first wave of DC punk bands were, everybody was admitting their love for the Beatles and for melody and songcraft and kind of deeper thinking about what music and lyrics could look and sound like. And so it was a perfect time for me because I was coming with all this Cleveland information, like whatever had poured into the drain that was, the musical drain of Cleveland, and bringing it into this kind of like new wave of what was happening in DC, um, which was just really, really magical. It was just a really wonderful time where everybody was experimenting and things were really opening up. And that jived with, um, my starting to play more seriously in bands that weren't just cover bands.
Yes. So Shudder to Think, they when did they form? Is that 85 or 86?
It was 86, so I would have been like 16 or 17. And it was essentially a hardcore band, bat, 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 pretty screamy,
Yes.
really good, uh, definitely DC style. But the singer had just gone off to college, and the guitar player's girlfriend and I were in a high school like musical together, and she gave me a cassette and said, "Hey, my boyfriend's band is looking for a singer." I had just gotten kicked out of a bunch of DC bands because I sang weird, and I'm sure I was like trying way too hard. And I was still I hadn't evolved out of Cleveland yet. Um, I wasn't quite DC cool enough, which turned out to work in my favor eventually. But so I auditioned for this hardcore band, and it was a very strange collision, like the sort of Ozzy Susie
Yes.
of my voice, kind of semi-hysterical teenage keening, with this bap, 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 hardcore DC hardcore music. But basically by the end of the audition rehearsal, we were all like, wait, there's something else happening here. There's something like potentially, we all heard it, even though if I played you a cassette of it now, we wouldn't be able to pinpoint what was unique or original about it. But we're
Yes.
all feeling it in the room, and we're like, let's do this. And that became Shudder to Fame.
Blimey, and there you go. So can you remember when you first went in the studio? What was the kind of the moment that you'd written your first song together and sort of got into the studio together?
It's interesting because there's a guy named Andy Coronado who has this great limited edition, very bespoke, all vinyl label right now called LG.
Ooh.
And I'm pretty sure he uses the proceeds from his very successful tequila company, which is called La Gratona. He was like a DC, punk rock nerd who, now he's a grown-up family man. And he's been taking the unreleased cassette demos, mostly, of great DC bands, and releasing them on vinyl. And he just released the very first Shudder to Think recordings from 86, 87. So it's so funny that you asked that, because the one of the first songs that we wrote after I joined the band, we never finished it, and we never put it on a proper record until it was the cassette demos were released recently. But it's called Cure Song. Because we were like, oh, what is that? It just sounds like The Cure. We'll just call it Cure Song, right? I don't know if I even ever finished the lyrics, so it never made it past Cure Song territory. But I don't know, it was a strange combination of like DC punk, like more that sort of proto-emo thing, not the pop punk emo thing, but like the Rites of Spring world, and all of the things we were listening to, which would have been like 4AD, Cocteau Twins, Replacements.
What about people like Dead Can Dance? Did they come onto your radar at all?
Oh yeah. Dead Can Dance were huge for me.
Yes, because 80s sort of, that's an interesting period, because 87, like the Smiths breakout, which I think, like for me, every 5 years, say 3 to 5 years, there's a new wave of young people come along and they want their band. They want to discover that band. They don't want someone else who's been around for 2 albums or 3 albums and is getting all angsty. And then, like that ecstasy world comes along in the UK a bit, where suddenly people have kind of want to get into the dance scene. So
they're like
people like the Happy Mondays make that move, Soup Dragons, Primal Scream. Then you have those DJs like a guy called Gerald, 808 State. And people were starting to rave a bit more as the 80s start to come to an end. Did that kind of come into your world at all? I mean, you had Chicago house music and stuff like that.
Yeah, very different. That Chicago house thing. Well, there was the Chicago house thing, which bled into the like Chicago Wax Trax industrial thing. So we would have been more aware of like the Wax Trax thing because it was more coming from punk.
Yes.
Than like Carl Craig or I don't know if you have Chicago or Detroit. But the Manchester thing was really interesting because I remember Shudder to Think was on tour. It might have been our first European tour, and everybody was in their like baggies and daisy, flower thing.
Oh yes, in spiral carpets.
Yeah. And I remember just really, really feeling it hard. Even though I wasn't super into the bands, there was just an energy that was palpable.
Yes.
And so we playing with, I don't know, we played a couple festivals on that tour.
Was that kind of
be getting my years wrong, but it was like New Fast Automatic Daffodils.
Oh yes.
And like
was it Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine?
Yeah, right. And even like early Blur or something like that.
Jesus Jones as well.
Jesus Jones. That might have been a minute later, but I just remember feeling like there was something, exactly what you're saying, like the someone had turned the record over and there was like a new crop of kids doing a new thing. It didn't seep into our music, but it was really infectious and positive feeling to be around.
Yes. And then obviously, but we also, on 4AD, there was also the Pixies and Throne Muses had sort of
Yeah, that sort
appeared.
of next phase, the like phase 2 of 4AD, right?
Yes.
Which was interesting because I was sort of a first generation 4AD guy, although I love Pixies and love Breeders and love Throwing Muses. And Red House Painters, there was some beautiful stuff on there, but for me, there's no comparison between uh It'll End in Tears, the first This Mortal Coil record, and Lonely as an Eyesore, the second one, which was like the second wave,
Yes.
where they were starting to get into like lonely, windswept desert Americana stuff.
Yes. Well,
I don't
actually, you
know.
would love it. There was a really great, I think the first ever recording or release on 4AD was a band called Rima Rima,
Yeah, I love Rima Rima. That
and
somehow made it to DC. And
that's
my
really
friend Will Weems
unbelievable.
had Rima Rima. I know, it was unbelievable. My friend Will Weems had the Rima Rima, and it's Marco from Adam and the Ants, I think.
Yes, Marco's there, and Gary Asquith, who was Renegade Soundwave,
Yeah, yeah.
and then the other guys then went on to bands on 4AD, which I can't now remember their names, but or the bands, but they were all sort of went on 4AD
Yeah.
as well. So
Although I think of all of them, I mean, obviously that first wave is very near and dear to my heart. Cocteau Twins are one of my favorite bands, and Liz is, speaking of goddesses and goddess voices. Um, but uh, did you ever listen to the album 69 by A.R. Kane? I think it was a 4AD record.
oh yes,
That's one of
yes,
my favorites, maybe my favorite from that like little moment. And I feel like that was sort of like transitional. It was like as ecstasy and rave stuff was coming in, but after the sort of pure kind of goth phase of 4AD.
yeah.
But
I think
Rima Rima's wonderful. I even wrote like Rima Rima, Rima Rima,
we,
Rima Rima, or something like
well,
that.
did you see the film on that they made about Rima Rima, which was quite
No,
extraordinary? God, I will have to send you the link to the
please, that's
trailer,
very exciting. Very
which is
exciting.
quite good. There was even a guy. It was quite a fascinating story because you think, okay, they had one release, they lasted 8 months, and you managed to make a film about this, but they
Oh, that's so
did.
great.
But they had a great clip from this chap who's in your neck of the woods, who has this thing called synesthesia, where
Yeah,
he listens to music, has kind of, oh
yeah,
yes,
sees
this.
colors.
So he's
Yeah.
got even a perfume for. He does actually most of his perfumes are basically 4AD bands. It's quite funny when you look at the
That's
roster,
wonderful.
and one of them
How
is
are the
Rima Rima,
fragrances
which
themselves?
which does feature quite a bit. I think quite heavy on patchouli actually. If
Ah,
I
that's so that's really
but
funny. I would
he's done
love.
Lush and the Pale Saints and various German bands as well, which is quite amusing. But I will send you.
I love Pale Saints. I was a fan. Yeah.
Yes, well, yeah. So it has all the people like the guy from Fetus is on there, and Chris Conley's
Jim
on there.
Thirlwell.
Yes, that's the one.
Hmm.
So, yes, you must try and check out this movie because you'll laugh and smile and there is some kind of guy from I don't know, somebody in your world who also thought it was one of the great records of all time. So,
Yeah. Hmm.
yes,
Yeah.
you'll
It was always fascinating to me what did and did not make it to DC and to Cleveland. Like it's so bizarre. Like I'm just remembering in eighth grade, so it would have been what 82, something like that. 13. We took a class trip down to the Cleveland Public Library downtown, and I didn't know where to get punk records or any of this stuff that I knew was out there. I was sort of seeing it and feeling it, but not knowing how to access it yet because it was just like FM top 40 classic rock radio. And I remember digging through the record crates at the public library and seeing this record. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that the cover scared me, which was always a good sign back then.
yes,
And it was the first Killing Joke record.
okay,
So I remember grabbing the first Killing Joke record and maybe a Squeeze record. or something like that, and just putting them in my backpack like any self-respecting, rebellious 13-year-old, and just stealing them. And that's still my copy of the first Killing Joke record, which is still to this day one of my favorite and most continually inspiring and referenced records in Shudder to Think, when I'm just talking about sound and space, production-wise, that fusion of not high and low, but like smart music and primal music, of
Right.
dance music and punk music, of rock and roll and avant-garde music. Um, it's such a touchstone, and that was one of the records that made it like really inspired a lot of DC bands.
Yes. I could
Eh,
imagine, actually.
yeah,
Did the hair, because I mean, obviously, you mentioned MTV. I mean, hair metal at this point has become rather massive, hasn't it? We
that
can't
was
move.
like that was like late 80s, right? So
Yes.
there was the like 81 through 85, which was sort of the sweet spot for MTV
Yes.
for me anyway, because I could come home after school, go to my grandma's house, which is where my first band would have band practice. And between school and band practice, while I was doing homework, I would get to see like an XTC video, a Depeche Mode video, a Madness video, and even sometimes like an early Public Image video.
Yes.
Um, so then by about 85, when the American record industry had caught on to MTV, it started becoming much more hair metal centric, which for me was really a drag because it was so kind of retrograde. That was just, there weren't a ton of great bands. There weren't a ton of new ideas. I mean, some of them were wonderful. I'm a huge Def Leppard fan, but I don't consider them hair metal, even though I know they're lumped in with that.
Yes.
Um, I'm a huge Van Halen, David Lee Roth era fan, but they transcend those categories, in my opinion, musically. But all that other stuff was just, it just wasn't memorable music. And also, by that point, we were into the New York Dolls, we were into T-Rex, we're like, we were into early Aerosmith, like 70s Aerosmith. And it was just sort of like, none of these people, maybe with the exception of early Motley Crue, were doing any of it justice or any kind of like significant um, reimagining. It just didn't feel creative.
No. Well, but very popular. You couldn't move for it, could you? Really? It was there.
It was
But
just there. Yeah,
it was very much in your face.
a
Dave
monolith.
Coverdale, Bon Jovi. It was
Yeah,
just it was it was hard to move. And Phil Collins, he was all over the 80s, wasn't he? Like,
I love Phil Collins. I got no beef. I've had so many arguments with so many friends who are like, only Peter Gabriel era Genesis. I'm there for all of it. Peter Gabriel Genesis, Peter Gabriel solo, Phil Collins Genesis, Phil Collins solo. It's beautiful music.
yes, well, absolutely. Then so with Shudder to Think, by sort of 88, you bring out your first album though, Curse the Spells Voodoo.
Mhm.
Is this kind of anything that you demoed on your first album cassette, or was this all
Yeah, I
new material?
suppose those are all things. When I say demoed, we had a little 4-track, or I had a little 4-track cassette player where I would record my own stuff, which is probably ultimately more connected to, say, my new solo record, just like bedroom art pop or whatever it was. But then I would bring it to Shudder to Think rehearsal, and occasionally we would have demo recording sessions where I'm sure we worked out a lot of the stuff that would wind up on Curses. Um, I don't remember whether we had like a proper demo session for Curses or whether by that point we, excuse me, we'd played those songs out enough and properly or improperly 4-track demoed them in the basement so that we could sort of take it home and listen to it and, kind of trim the fat.
Hmm.
because we certainly didn't have any time or money recording Curses or really any of the Discord records that we did. So we had to have that stuff down, you know. So
Yes.
by the time we got in the studio, we knew what we were recording. It was very efficient.
And was it a big deal getting on Discord Records at this stage?
It was huge. It was huge. Amanda Mackay, who ran Sandwich Records, which was literally a sister label to Discord, because Ian Mackay ran Discord Records. Amanda was his little sister. She and I went to high school together.
Right.
And she agreed to put out Curses, and it was really wonderful and very exciting. It took a couple years for people to sort of warm to Shudder to Think in the scene, you know? I think at first, sort of more first wave Discord people, I think even including Ian, were sort of like, but there's a singer and he sings really high and he dresses up in like costumes. You know, speaking of Peter Gabriel era Genesis.
Yes.
I don't think it was, I think it didn't make sense at first, but gradually, you know, sort of as I was saying, like everybody was experimenting and expanding their palette, and you know, so we all fell in love with each other, and then eventually Ian asked if we wanted to you know, have Discord put out our second record, 10 Spot, and we were thrilled because we love those guys and that label, and so it was really wonderful. It was really very special.
On the next album, Funeral at the Movies, which is you're really in your stride at this stage, aren't you? This is where the sound. Red House, that's kind of one of the your sort of classic records. Can you remember how that record comes about? How?
Yeah, so our second album, which our first Discord record, was called 10 Spot. Our third one was Funeral at the Movies. They got put together as one record as a CD release.
Yes.
So 10 Spot was us sort of finding our stride. There are wonderful songs on it, I think. It's actually an album that I really want to remix because it's kind of muddy, and you know, we were still sort of stuck in 80s production tactics, which created a sort of gauze or like indirectness to the songs just because of production choices we were making. We're like, let's put more gate on the drums because we were listening to The Cure. Right?
Yes.
When it didn't necessarily serve the actual songs that we were writing. But then by Funeral at the Movies, we were actually on tour in England, touring 10 Spot and writing songs for Funeral, writing and performing songs that would become this Funeral at the Movies, sort of somewhere in between an EP and LP. And John Loder, who ran Big Cat Records, but wait, what was his label called at that time? Eventually he ran Big Cat Records, but at the time it was called, I'm spacing.
It's not Demon or something like that, is it?
No, John Loder, Loder. He was wonderful. And his label and Discord had a relationship. He had a studio in London, so we arranged to record all the new songs in London. And we had a few days off at the end of the tour, so we were sort of a well-oiled machine by then.
Yes.
And again, a lot of times just performing these songs live, it just burns off a lot of fat of like what is and is not necessary in new material. Because you're getting this instant kind of energetic reaction circuit electrical thing with the audience. It's like, it's like a comedian. It's like, well, that joke bombed. Lose that joke. That's a good joke. Let's keep working on that joke. And so we went into the studio and we recorded Funeral at the Movies in a couple days, and it just really, 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 it was just really clear and really direct, and the songs were I don't know, there was something kind of refined. Yeah, we had sort of refined our sound, or at least our sound for kind of the first wave of Shudder to Think. Like where the original guitar player, Chris Matthews, would usually come in with guitar parts, and then we would work on it as a band instrumentally. Then I would figure out the vocals, and then we would tour it, and then we would record it. It's a very different process now, right? Because of digital recording and the complications of logistics of touring. But so we just went in and banged that stuff out. And we really, we were always, probably still are, kind of pulled between the two poles of pop and art music. Like experimental on the one side and maybe pop on the other side. And there's really great tension. When Shudder to Think is working at its best, there's often this great tension between the two.
Yeah.
And so we really wanted, we were super into Sonic Youth at the time, and a lot of things that were coming out of more of the
I suppose
noise.
had they had Daydream Nation and Goo?
Yeah, I think they'd had Daydream Nation by then.
Right, so they were on it. And also the Butthole Surfers were around quite a bit at that point, weren't they?
Butthole Surfers were huge to us. I don't think Isn't Anything by My Bloody Valentine had come out yet. That would have been like the next record.
I think that, yes, that was about 80, 89, My Bloody Valentine. And then we obviously had, Loveless as well was coming out at that.
Yeah.
1990, wasn't it? But yeah, it was just Red House has this great sonic feeling and tension in it, and just lovely kind of changes of tempo and moods, which is just a gorgeous song, isn't it?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yes. So yes, your inspiration for it, how did that sort of come about?
It's a really good question. I as I recall, Chris Matthews, the guitar player, came in with that part that's sort of like F, I think it's like F, G, or is it F to G, and then like A, C, something. And honestly, I think at first I was probably singing like Dreams by Fleetwood Mac over it, because it's that sort of progression, dun dun dun, dum 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 dum, same chords. And I don't know. It was definitely, there are always songs in every band's sort of trajectory that open up into the next phase or the next realm. And that was one of those songs where it just almost immediately, as I recall, made sense and clicked into place. One thing about it is I never had, and still don't have, fixed lyrics for it. I would let the lyrics change every night.
Right.
The melody was always the same, but I really didn't want to nail it down wherever I was at that point. Dreams, surrealism, whatever it was. That felt spontaneous and fresh. But then, of course, what we weren't thinking about and didn't quite realize at the time is once you record something, it's sort of definitive.
Yes.
Right? It freezes it. So whatever the lyrics were that day that we recorded it in London at John Loder's place, that became the kind of template, even though I'm kind of mumbo-jumboing my way through it. And I think I really learned from that. I was like, lock your lyrics down, Craig, because once it's recorded, that's what it is. And there are lyrics in that original version, so words and lyrics and poetry are very important to me. So important that I almost universally ignore most people's lyrics. Because if I paid too much attention, it would just be a bummer, because most people aren't great writers, right? And so I take a lot of care to try and make special lyrics. And with Red House, I don't know if they were that special. There are good lines in it, and it's very impressionistic. But in retrospect, I learned a lesson that day, which was like, lock it down in the future before you get into the
right.
before you get into the studio. I'm
That's so
still trying to figure. I'm still working on those lyrics for that song.
So when you got that one, did you find yourself an audience started to? Were you coming on more people's radar at that point?
I don't know. I mean, by that point, we definitely when Funeral at the Movies came out, and then our next album, Get Your Goat, there was a lot of really great press, like London music press, like NME and Musical Express and Sounds. Um, we were getting a lot of love, so it was great. So something about that connected with people. So I think it makes
Yes.
sense because it's very melodic. It almost, I mean, it's almost like it's not Britpop at all, but it has that melodic, like kind of classic melodic sensibility. It connects to the past, it connects to the future.
Yeah, I could imagine both, I know, as a music fan in Britain, there's nothing more exciting than hearing someone like John Peel, who was the DJ at the time, play some really obscure American band.
Yeah,
And
sure.
you just they automatically you would get more like, oh my God, I've discovered this most
Yeah, yeah,
obscure, no one else knows it. So it always seemed very exotic, somehow
yeah,
felt like you were scoring big time on the obscurity that would get
right.
you, absolutely no appreciation because no one would know the band, but you discover this little gem. So I think a
Yeah,
lot of times in the UK, because it's such a small little country, isn't it? But such a passionate kind of music press, because we
yeah,
had the NME, Sounds Melody Maker, then there was magazines that started to come out like Q and then Mojo and
yeah,
stuff like
sure,
that. So
sure.
there was this kind of interest. I could imagine a lot of people just loved Shudder to Think because of the kind of the quirkiness and the sort of reference
That's right.
points that you could
That's
hear
right.
from it. And also we'd also probably were around that time where Nevermind was coming out or about to explode. So
Never mind and Loveless, right? They were the same year. That was sort of like bam.
and then we had
But
Sugar, which came out as well, Bob Mould's next,
yeah,
musical. So there
hmm
was always these kind of like, you're always keeping an eye on what was going on in America at that stage. And
yeah, and you were
obviously it was
doing the
a
same with
bit of a
you.
golden period before it becomes kind of
Yeah, before it
hideous,
became sad and tedious, right?
hideous and ends with Woodstock 99, which is
Oh,
like,
I mean, it's
it-
dramatic.
it's dramatic. It's a
Yeah,
great movie, but I wouldn't
yeah,
want
yeah.
to
It
be
makes it
there.
makes a good movie.
So when you done 3 albums with Discord and then Epic, signing to Epic, was that a kind of a major moment for the band?
It was literally a major label moment for the band, and it was tough. Like DC and the DC underground community and Discord Records in particular, you know, is and was staunchly anti-corporate and anti-establishment and DIY and community based, which we love and loved, but we were never shy about our ambitions, which were to reach as many people as possible with precisely the music that we wanted to make, right? So we had started working on our next record, Pony Express record, which was if anything, like our most kind of challenging and fragmented in certain ways um, songwriting. And suddenly, like you were saying, sort of post Nevermind, um, everything had blown wide open, and
And
alternative
there'd been
bands were.
and the band had changed a couple of the members at this
Yeah,
stage.
so I graduated college after the album Get Your Goat, and or during the album Get Your Goat, and I wanted to do it full time, and we agreed as a band. Stuart Hill, who was the bass player who started the band, um, wanted to do it full time, and things were going really, really well. We'd been on this sort of like really organic, slow, steady upward trajectory, um, success-wise, creatively. The juices were flowing. I was starting to do a lot of songwriting in the band, which I had not done earlier.
Yes.
And so we were sort of brimming with creativity at that point. The drummer, Mike Russell, from sort of Shudder Think Mach 1, didn't really want to live that lifestyle, and who can blame an adult?
Well,
Um,
absolutely.
so he made a clean break when we moved from Discord. Chris, the guitar player, also I think was really torn because he was an archaeologist and a punk rock guitar player, so he had to make a choice, and he went back to school, became an archaeologist and a teacher. And so we were sort of suddenly left with half a band, Stuart and I. And one of my best friends at the time, Nathan Larson, who had played in a bunch of great DC punk bands, and he and I had been making music together, just like more experimental home recording stuff since high school. He joined Shudder to Think as a guitar player. He had always been, a sort of extended family of Shudder to Think. So he knew the songs, he knew kind of how it went. And he and I had a really great creative rapport. And for better and for worse, that kind of classic, like, foil chemistry, the, like, lead singer, lead guitar player thing, which is so potent when it's working and so destructive when it's not. Which we knew even at the time. We were like, this is risky for our friendship, but boy, are we going to make some cool music. So he joined the band, and then a drummer named Adam Wade was playing the band Jawbox, a wonderful DC band, with whom we were touring, and we just all sort of fell in love, like Adam and the rest of Shudder to Think, and that was right around the time when Mike decided he was going to leave. So it really worked out perfectly, and that was right around the time when there were just A&R people showing up from every label, from the smallest indies to the biggest majors, at our and everybody's shows.
Right.
It was just it was a feeding frenzy. It was crazy. Unsustainable, commercially, but really, really intoxicating and heady at the time. Early mid-20s, looking to keep growing the band. Alternative music is just really happening. Little did we know it was actually the end, not the beginning of that wondrous movement.
Yes.
Like the wave had broken. We just didn't know it yet. And in terms of what like first attracted us to to punk and underground and post-punk in the first place. But so it was tough. It was Ian Mackay, I think, was not thrilled with us, even though we all loved each other very much, and there was no subterfuge about it. We were just like, look, we want to do this. I was living in New York City. A couple of us were living in New York City. And we wanted to give Shudder to Think the best shot we could. And the other thing was our A&R guy who had signed us based on Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, really liked this one song of ours from our final Discord album. The song was called Pebbles. The album was called Get Your Goat. And he had heard it on the radio in Seattle and told their A&R guy about it, this guy Michael Goldstone, who signed Pearl Jam, and he signed Rage Against the Machine, and went on to start DreamWorks. He just started showing it up at our shows, and he was like, man, I don't totally get what you guys are doing musically, because already we were like playing most of what would become Pony Express record, which was our first major label record and sort of our biggest record and kind of most difficult record. He was like, I'm not totally sure I get what you're doing musically, but I see how the relationship you have with an audience, and like, it's beautiful. Right. And I want to help build that. We were like, great, that's what we want to do too. And so to his credit and to Epic Records' credit, they signed us like based on this like obtuse material, body, albums worth of songs, and it was really wonderful actually for a little while, and then the worm turned.
Well, absolutely. Did you enjoy making Pony Express record, by the way? Was this a good experience at this point?
Well, it was a very good experience, but we were super intense and super ambitious, and there's like a darkness that I associate with that time and era. And part of it was just how hard we were putting ourselves through our paces. It was not light or fun, but it was a great experience. Um, yeah, there was a lot swirling around in that era. We were sort of young and
your songwriting, you'd really, this had come to the fore now, and you'd sort of, you were
yeah,
writing
yeah,
the material.
yeah. By the album before Get Your Goat, I was writing a lot of material, and I wrote a lot of the stuff on Pony Express record and 50,000 BC, our next record too. But it's still very much as it had always been, very much. The songs in the form that you hear are very much band songs. So it's not like Shudder Think has never been, here's the song, here's your part, here's your part, here's your part, play this, play this, play this. Like, I'll come in with ideas. Sometimes it'll be a whole song, sometimes it'll be a part, and then we just take it and it goes where it goes.
So songs like Hot Liquor or Ex-French T-shirt, were they songs that came together quite quickly, or were they things that you had to
They
work on for
did.
quite a
They
while?
came together. Well, it's sort of both. Like the initial, let's call it the good bones,
Yes.
came together quickly, but then putting the meat and flesh on those bones sometimes took a while, right? So like we were actually talking about it the other day, Nathan and I. Hit Liquor, Nathan was over at my dad's apartment in DC, and I had this like busted nylon string. I tend to like to write on nylon strings because
Yeah.
it makes me feel like a better guitar player than I think I probably actually am. Um, and Nathan was in this sort of like Dylan-esque folky phase, and he was playing like some C chord configuration. And I was like, yeah, but like, what if we just took it and like took a C chord? Not that we knew necessarily what a C chord was at the time. We were just blindly feeling our way, um, and sort of shattered it against the wall. So as was my wont back then, I would get very excited and kind of grab instruments out of my bandmates' hands, which was not so considerate of me. Never in a mean way, just in a like, gotta get the idea out kind of way. Um, I've since learned to temper that. But I remember kind of grabbing the guitar and being like, yeah, what was like this? And it came out as this like Captain Beefheart playing, this is Hit Liquor, Captain Beefheart playing like Proud Mary by Creedence Clearwater Revival or something like that. And so the initial framework for something like Hit Liquor came out very quickly, but then the details, the kind of architecture of it, we really worked on a lot as a band.
Right.
Ex-French T-shirt, Ex-French T-shirt. So that's our like Bob Dylan. Hit Liquor would be like our Bob Dylan, Creedence Clearwater Revival total inversion, right? And then Ex-French T-shirt, I remember working on the basics for that same nylon guitar, and I had a little like digital cassette recorder clock in my bedroom that I would just record all my ideas into. And I remember just playing. We were in the middle of working on Pony Express record by that point, and so it was like very complex music, very architectural music, and I was like, oh, I want to do something really simple with as few chords as possible, um, and as much melody as possible, but in unexpected ways. And I
Right.
remember working out the basic shape of X French T-shirt, and when that vocal came out, hold back the road that goes, that little bit, I was like, oh, that's totally Joni Mitchell. So in our brains, we're like, it's like Bob Dylan and Creedence Clearwater Revival and Joni Mitchell, but then by the
Beautiful.
time you hear it, it sounds like Shudder Thing.
Nice. God, this
Yeah.
is amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's got a very intense album, and I guess the band at this stage are at their youthful, energetic kind of
Yeah.
peak. I get, with Epic Records,
Yeah, I
the
think
kind
so.
of promotion behind you. And
For
also,
sure.
you can only have that moment at a certain age in your life. When that
Yeah,
album came out, did you tour in it? Was that a nice or good experience at that point?
it was wonderful. I mean, we were sort of a band's band, so like a lot of big bands really loved us and were friends and took us out on tour. So, we opened for Smashing Pumpkins and Pavement and Foo Fighters, and Dave Grohl had been a friend from the DC punk world, from high school, and Fugazi, and it was just it was really great. Oh, I'm actually remembering this was before Pony Express, but I think it was during Get Your Goat. I remember touring with. Do you remember that Daisy Chainsaw?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
yeah. We toured with them. It was great. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience for a little while. And then things started to get really dark and started to sour, interpersonally within the band. Um, it was very hard for me, you talk about like asthma from a young age. I've had like really intense allergies my whole life, which I'm sure is probably partly why my voice sounds the way it does,
Right.
which is a good thing. But it became very, very difficult to like stay healthy on tour. Um, my personality is very extroverted, and I was young and wanted to hang out and do like the rock and roll thing. But the reality of my constitution and the way that I like to sing and the very high standards to which we hold ourselves musically and performance-wise in Shudder to Think just made it really hard to um, keep things light. And it
Mm.
just started getting really, really suffocating and dark and difficult in the band. On top of which, we really were um, shooting for the moon in terms of success, jumping back to Cleveland and, bands that inspired us. You know, we wanted to be Van Halen level, the Cars level, doing Pony Express record music. To us, that would have been like the coup of the century, right? The album did okay, you know, but not by major. It did pretty well, but not by major label standards.
No, it wasn't. I
Uh,
guess at that stage you had Soul Asylum,
yeah,
Systems of Down,
yeah, yeah,
Marilyn
exactly.
Manson was there. I guess
That's
record
right.
companies were just thinking, we
Yeah, it
want
was that
those
or
millions.
yeah,
We want.
exactly. I remember even having a meeting at Epic, which was like part of the Sony Corporation, and we used to call that building up on Madison Avenue the Death Star. We got a meeting at the Death Star. Okay, we'll meet there too. And and I remember a meeting, and everybody was so sweet at the label. Like they were great. Like nor was there any ill will or blame. It's like I get it. We knew going into it. We'd read all the books. We'd heard all the all the lore. It's a huge business. They need to make hits, and they need to in order to make money. Um,
Yes.
so we didn't begrudge them that. And like I come from a family of like lawyers and stockbrokers and teachers, Midwestern. So very practical, right? I didn't come from like artists or libertines in any way. So I was like, okay, we get it. You need hits. What do you like? Give us an example of what you have in mind. And I remember somebody at the meeting, and this was where we knew this was the moment we knew we were like, this is not, we're not long for this relationship. They were like, closing time. Da, ba, 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 ba. You know that song? Was that popular over there?
Yes.
And we were like, oh no, this isn't going to work out at all. And then our A&R guy, Michael, um, left Epic to start DreamWorks, which who can blame a guy? And we were sort of in a little bit of a free fall for a little while. And at which point I was diagnosed with cancer.
Yes, this is
Which
quite
was
were you aware of something not being quite right, or were
well,
you?
everything felt off. Everything felt off. It was like a cosmic, holistic darkness and disconnection within the band, in a lot of our personal relationships, with the label, with a lot of friends. It was prior to my diagnosis, I started having strange skin rashes and conditions.
Right.
I couldn't sleep. I kind of went crazy. There were two times in my life I felt like maybe I'm losing my mind, and that was one of them. But I suppose if I was able to think it, maybe
Yes, my
I was
God.
still in my right mind.
So then you had tests, and then they said you've got cancer.
Yeah. And interestingly, it kind of brought the band back together for a little while, right? Like it just shook us out of our ego bullshit. Reminded us that, you know, it was always very much a family operation, and we really love each other a lot. Um, and just sort of, reoriented our priorities, and our blessings, really.
And how long was your treatment for this?
I had 6 months of chemotherapy, and then, I don't know, a month or two off, and then a month straight of radiation. So it was like 9 months in total.
Bloody hell. God,
And it was during that time that, like, so I'd started, I'd, I'd been bringing in a lot of new material to the rehearsal space before I was diagnosed that was very much in the vein of Pony Express record.
Yeah.
And it was like I'd lost the room. Like, it was just sort of I don't know, a membrane, or just like a wall of, this expression. How do we describe this on an audio podcast? A sort of stone wall, right? Stone faces, and we just were not all working together as a unit, and it was devastating for me because I thought it was exciting new material, and I wasn't getting anything back, and so we couldn't move it anything like the way I was describing Hitlicker and Ex-French T-shirt and even Red House, where, one of us would bring in some parts and then we would all work on it. And it was very cellular, like singular as a unit. And that wasn't happening. And so it felt like maybe it was all over. And that really contributed to my um, relative insanity. And then when I was diagnosed, that all fell away and we were really a unit again, or at least committed to the Shudder to Think enterprise. And I went back, and Nathan and Stuart in particular, their tastes were sort of in the soul, roots, Stax records, and sort of like new Americana stuff thing that was happening.
Oh yes, there was a lot. I don't know if the drive-by truckers had happened, but there was Wilco, wasn't there? And there was certain, and there was also people like there was I don't know, there was Stacey Earle, was Gillian Welsh around at that stage?
Yeah, I don't know if she was quite around yet, but it was like just starting to percolate.
Yes,
and my taste was more going to like Warp Records,
right?
So it was more like I was going more electronic. I was even super excited about like the bubblegum pop, like boy band stuff that was happening.
Take that.
Like yeah, exactly. The American version would have been like Backstreet Boys or whatever.
Right.
It was just so refreshing after the bummer of late 90s overly serious post-alternative music that was happening.
Men in check shirts.
Yeah. Singing about their woes. And
their stepfather.
Yeah, singing about their stepfather. And so I just started, I just went back and kind of scrapped the whole thing and started writing kind of for all of us and bringing the material, and everybody seemed excited again. It was way more of a hybrid of what Shudder to Think had been, and much more, at least in our brains, what we thought was like radio friendly,
Yes.
even though it still ultimately just turned out to sound like Shudder to Think. And while I was undergoing treatment, we made this record, Pony Express record, which was our final major label, proper collection of songs. And we all loved that record. It was a total flop. And that was ultimately kind of probably the death knell for the band, although we were starting to dip our toes into film and TV soundtracks.
So when you came to 50,000 BC, is it a kind of a bit of a compilation of stuff then?
No. No, the only thing, the label had said, hey, we want you to re-record Red House for this.
Right.
Which everybody had there were mixed feelings about it. Some people were like, that's a bad idea. It feels desperate. But I think what we decided, we were like, well, let's record it during the sessions. And if it's good, why not? And we really loved the version. And so we were like, great, let's put it on the record because it feels like a legitimate offering, not just like a weird, sad rehash.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? But then you get into films, don't you, at the same time? This is
right around the same time.
So did you write the lyrics for Ballad of Maxwell Demon?
I did, yeah.
And also the hot one as well.
So I wrote the Ballad of Maxwell Demon, and Nathan wrote Hot One.
Blimey. Yeah. They're great lyrics, aren't they?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. I mean, so were you at this stage, were you channeling the spirit had you put a mask on and started writing material?
Yeah, which was great. It was a really nice way to kind of get out of the sort of Frankenstein of our own straitjacket of like Shudder to Think having to be this serious like art outing. And like I remember Randy Poster, so we had done songs for our friend Jesse Peretz's first movie, director friend, who was my roommate for a while, and then he and Nathan were roommates for a while. And he was making his first movie, had very low budget, but one of the main characters had a record collection in the movie, and they couldn't afford to license all these oldies.
Right.
So he asked us to write all of them, right? We got to work with these incredibly great singers, many of whom were friends of ours, Jeff Buckley, Billy Corgan, Liz Phair. And then that sort of opened the floodgates, where then Robin Zander from Cheap Trick sang on it, and John Doe from X sang on it. It was really an extraordinary experience. We became friends with Angela McCluskey, bless her heart. May she rest in peace on that record. Matt Johnson from it was incredible. And so we started having some heat in the kind of what was then the burgeoning New York indie film world of the late 90s, which was great. And we got a call from Randy Poster, who was a music supervisor, still is. And he was doing this movie with Todd Haynes called Velvet Goldmine.
Yes.
Which was, a sort of a love letter to Todd's glam rock youth. Todd's probably more around your age. And so it was more like the Iggy, Bowie, Lou Reed, Joe Bryant,
classic,
whatever it is, fantasy. And Bowie, I guess, didn't want to license his material for it.
Yeah, there was that kind of thing, wasn't there? He was, I don't know. I think they still have that problem with when they do a biopic of Bowie, the estate says, no, you're not, and they have to go, oh, this film's not going to be very good now, is it? But actually, exactly. On saying that, I do think Velvet Goldmine is just a classic, so I love it.
Oh, it just worked so beautifully. And we were sort of skeptical, too. We're like, what? You're like, somebody's covering Roxy Music and T-Rex? How are you going to do that? Those are, speaking of definitive. So we got a call, and Randy was like, hey, do you think you guys could do like some like Diamond Dogs era Bowie stuff? And it was like, it was like springtime. The windows opened and the flower perfumed the room, right? We were like, because with Shudder to Think, it was quite laborious and kind of craft intensive.
Yes.
With this, and we would never have let ourselves within Shudder to Think, right, under that moniker, do anything that sounded like anybody else. At least not overtly. Obviously, like, influences come through. But if we were conscious of the influences, we would generally not let them in. So, like you said, to be able to put on a mask, do some musical character acting, and honor our heroes, right? Who are just like in our musical DNA. It really just sort of like poured out. It was not terribly effortful and really joyous. And I'm
Yes.
still super happy with the results.
It's quite, yeah. I mean, it's got a very kind of princess kind of funkiness to the songs that you did on that album, and also just a sort of surreal. I mean, that magic realism that Bowie would sometimes have, like, moving like tigers on Vaseline, which is always a great line, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing.
We think it's never seen tigers on Vaseline, but we love the idea.
No, we know it. We know it.
But again, got tired of wasting gas, living above the planet. Were you just kind of going for a kind of stream of consciousness and imagery?
I was just going for Ziggy Diamond Dogs, with a little T-Rex thrown in for good measure, that kind of glam mumbo jumbo that makes sense, but not if you look at it too closely. It makes sense like tigers on Vaseline, right? It's just sort of it's a kind of intuitive sense that like tingles the little backs of the nape.
So there's a line on it which I think is just amazing. As the slap on my arse by a lipstick-kissed elbow glove. Now that is an amazing line. How did that one? I love that line, by the way.
Thank you.
How did that come about, by the way?
I was just flowing, honestly, and laughing really hard at, like, it was just coming out. It was just coming out. And there's something, I think a lot of actors would say that there's something about having an assignment, a framework where you know the parameters you're working within. It's that sort of like 72 to 74 phantasmagoric alien sexual, sensual, slightly sadomasochistic. And it just popped out and made me giggle. And usually if it makes me giggle, I keep it in.
Yes, it's just a classic. It's one of the most brilliant lines.
And also we want to do right by our heroes, right? So like we didn't, Bowie was alive then. We didn't know whether he would hear it or not, or if he ever did. But there was no way that we were going to do a pale impersonation. It was like, no, we're Shudder to Think. Like, we want to be a part of this lineage, not like just at its feet worshiping it, right? So it needs to be worthy of its inspiration,
Yes.
So, yeah.
And it captures the whole mood. I think, I still think the film is absolutely amazing, but
me too.
It unfortunately didn't seem to. I'm always I feel like the kiss of death really when I sort of think, God, this is going to be huge, and just completely just kind of go. Not always, but you know what I mean. It often feels a bit like that means that will never be a success. I don't know. It's just a brilliant film, and it captures it. And also 87, 88, that were period in this country. We'd had that John Major years, and we look back now. At the time, we moaned because we're British. We like to moan. Yes. But now we think, oh, my God, he was such a great politician and MP and such a decent guy. And then we had Team Tony and New Labour.
Yeah.
And there was this huge euphoric feeling that last the Conservatives are gone. And suddenly there was a huge amount of employment and the good money was flowing in by this stage. And
that was like you had Tony Blair. We had Bill Clinton.
Clinton, yeah. So there was these young dudes, and they knew what rock and roll, and they'd had some joints in their life, and it all felt like what could possibly go wrong. And
all of it, everything. Only a matter of time.
If only we could go back and tell them not to be such asses. But it was a great, it was a great euphoric feeling. And then obviously a few years later, I mean, I know it's not such a deep film, but there was that Austin Powers feeling. We were all getting very frivolous at this stage, weren't we? The late 90s. And then you have Woodstock 99, and you thought, oh God, this didn't end well. And then there was, I guess, that's when streaming came on, and then record companies all went, oh my God, this is not good.
And then it just changed everything. I mean, for better and for worse. I mean, I would say creatively, streaming, the sort of flattening of the kind of gatekeepers, tastemakers hierarchy of the 3 TV networks or the 5 major labels has been a wonderful thing. Along with the democratization of technology, of music and filmmaking technology. It's wonderful creatively, but if there's no way to make a living, then most people just don't keep at it long enough to ever get great.
Yes. They haven't had the apprenticeship. I think I've been doing this show now for a long time, and with those bands, especially the 80s, but probably the 90s as well, there was a sort of 18-month honeymoon period where they're rehearsing, they're playing a lot, they get a few gigs, but then we have John Peel or somebody, they give them that first play on the single, the John Peel session, which is always a big thing, and playing all these like art venues around the country, getting in their little transit van, going from city to city and stuff like that, and then they get the first album, second album, things going well, third album, it's a little bit tricky, and that's the 5-year moment where
the bloom is off the rose. They're
wondering where all the money's gone, and the fact they can't bear each other's breathing anymore, and
it's tough.
If they've given us those years of their life, it's good. They've created art that they won't appreciate for a long time, but we, the punters, loved it to pieces. The suffering of others. So, but like you said, how do you grind away all those months and years in a garage? Just hoping for that moment.
It's hard, and I think I think, as is often the case, if by the end of your 20s it's not really happening, that's sort of when people are thinking about families, or not thinking about it, it's just biological. You're just compelled to grow up, and we for a little while toward the end, and then we did this movie High Art, which was Lisa Cholodenko's first movie, which was our first sort of deeper scoring gig, where it was not song based but film score.
Right.
And there's a lot of trip hop happening in that score, and there was obviously that was that moment in '98 where that was all seeping through. And it's this very opiatic movie, so it was sort of appropriate to play around with that, and for High Art. And for a little while, we were like, okay, here's what Shudder Think's going to be. We're going to make our records when we want. We're going to tour when we want. And we're going to compose film and TV scores and produce and write music for other artists. And we're going to become... we're going to expand and become do all the things that we want to do and turn it into like a viable, kind of a grown-up version of it, where our lives, communities, wives, and relationships don't have to be shattered every time we do an album cycle. But by the time, I remember we were looking at spaces in Brooklyn when Brooklyn was just starting when it was still affordable, toward the end of the 90s, and we found some really cool spaces. We were fantasizing about it, but it was just too little too late. There had been a lot of damage interpersonally by that point, and I think we all just needed a break from each other.
Yes.
So that happened, and then we did a couple little reunion tours, and only in the last few weeks, literally, have we started playing together again and working on new material.
I know. I saw this on various social media sites, actually. But before then, you have brought out a solo album, haven't you? Which it sounds amazing.
Thank you.
So when did this start to become when did the project start on this album, which is titled The Dream
The Dream
Dreaming
Dreaming.
on
Yeah,
Tough Lover?
that's
Yes.
my latest solo record. And there was a point at which maybe around, honestly, it was probably around when I had a heart attack, right? 2018, 2017. It was about a 5-year period where I was just saying yes to everything. I was just sort of building out the film and TV and commercials and whatever else scoring world. Um, and at a certain point, it felt out of whack. I love doing it and I really enjoyed it, but it needs to be balanced with my own more personal material, whether it's band related or solo stuff. Um, and so at night, I basically sort of relegated myself for the film and TV stuff to more of a 9 to 5 schedule.
Yes.
And then at night, after dinner, I would let myself just do whatever. So these folders in my computer just like were building up and building up and building up with ideas ranging from like very experimental to very to relatively accessible. And gradually, uh, uh, the dreaming made itself clear. And it was like, oh, this is a record, and this is what this record is. And there was a little while where it was more Shudder to Thinky and guitar based, and then it became a little more synth and I guess dance, for lack of a better word,
Yes.
based.
So just going back,
Yeah,
2018, you mentioned
yeah.
heart attack. Again, was that something that you had started feeling, 2000, before that? Had you started having signs that you had
No,
ignored?
it was a total bolt from the blue. It was Thanksgiving here, and we were with my whole family in Florida. And I remember there was one little ocean swim that we took, and I think maybe I was swimming with my son and my cousins in the
Mm,
ocean. And I remember being unusually tired because I'm a pretty strong swimmer
right.
and my family are, fit. Uh, and I remember getting really scared in the ocean and be like, something's wrong. But I thought it was just that I was a little bit out of shape or that I'd had too much turkey the night before. And then the day that we got home, I remember getting in the bathtub. I like to take a bath almost every day. I remember getting in the bathtub and just not being able to get comfortable and sort of squirming around, not really knowing what it was. Went away, it was fine. I went to bed, my wife and I, and at about 2 in the morning, my body woke me up and I was just having the strangest sensation. I wouldn't describe it as a tingle. It didn't feel like anything that I had seen in the movies or heard described as a heart attack,
Yes.
but I knew something was off. I thought, oh, it's indigestion. Oh, it's some strange like an allergic reaction or something like that.
Yeah.
And my wife eventually woke up, broke up. That doesn't happen. And she woke up, and uh, so Megan, my wife, who magically brought me this coffee earlier, was like right on time, bless her heart. So she she's like Chicago Irish. She's pretty earthbound, very practical.
Hmm.
She's like the tent poles, and I'm the like flapping flag. Um, she's not prone to like visions and things like that. She got up and she put her hand on my chest, and she had a vision of these green spiky rocks popping out of my chest, and she
Right.
freaked out and immediately called 911. And I immediately collapsed on the bed, passed out, came to, and above me, it's very cinematic. Above me, if you can picture it, there's just this like halo of like very, very handsome Hollywood firefighters, right? It was like central casting, right? they looked down at me. They were putting all these things on my chest, taking my whatever reading, and literally just said, I was conscious long enough to hear, trust us, we've got this. It was literally like out of a movie. Then I passed out again. They put me on a stretcher, took me downstairs. I remember waking up long enough that our little son, he's 16 now, so he was probably 11, maybe
Yes.
10, 11, waking up and coming out of his room. I woke up long enough to like put him at ease. He's my best guy.
Yes.
And then they took me outside, and there was an ambulance with all of its lights blazing. And I remember being really embarrassed, thinking, "Oh my God, the neighbors are going to come out, and it's just so melodramatic, and it's just like it's something gastrointestinal."
Yes, there's just a bit of indigestion. It's
And
the
then it turned out
cheese.
to be like a massive widowmaker heart attack. Apparently, nobody admitted it at the time, but as the months went on later, everybody was just sort of like, "Yeah, we're surprised you made it. You almost died."
Right. So
then I
was
had
it a
to get
blocked one? Was it
5 cents
one blocked artery? And
multiple, not many, multiple. Yeah, it was really deep, and since then I've just been keeping, like, I think a healthier balance between like the personal work. I have like a meditation music practice, which is like this choral ambient improvised music that I do with like yoga teacher friends. Um, Shudder to Think is like healthy and happy again, and we're making new music. I'm always making new music of my own, and then doing great film and TV projects with people that I love, you know.
yeah, well, so the solo album. Sorry, I'm just always curious
Yeah,
about
yeah, no,
things.
it's cool.
So the Dreaming, yes. So this was this was material that had been recorded over quite a period of time. You'd had it on your computer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd done a couple other solo records. My first one I think I put out in 2004, which was much more straightforward after Shudder to Think broke up. I felt like I had to sort of like prove to people that like I could write a normal song, something like that.
Yes.
And then I did one in that was called Lapland. And I did one that Connor Oberst from Bright Eyes, his label Team Love, put that one out. And then 2011, 2012, I made a record called Wand that I wrote a movie around, but never quite got around to finishing. And that was more of sort of a clearinghouse of all the ideas that were on my computer that I loved, but didn't have a home.
Yeah.
Then in 2018, I put out a record called Adult Desire, which was more of a sort of electroacoustic, nocturnal, singer-songy, but experimental record. And then the Dreaming is like a pop record. I mean, in my world.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of the light, like Adult Desire is a little bit dark and nocturnal and I think led up to Heart Attack Land. And then the Dreaming was sort of letting all the light in.
Nice. It's an amazing sound. I mean, on your opening track, Fingers on My Face, you've got the most amazing drum bass sound on that.
Thank you. That means so much to hear because I really worked on that. Thanks.
Because I've listened to it a lot, and it's just got So was that your programming on that sort of created that? Because it's a hell of a sound you've got throughout that track.
Thank you.
I really love that.
Thinking about during that, it was almost like I was like, what if Suicide had ever written like a great radio pop song? There's something about. I remember I had multiple versions of that. One was like more on the drum machine, sort of Suicide drum machine side of things. And then I was doing a lot of playing drums on the record too, so a lot of things wound up being this really nice fusion of sort of organic and kind of traditional rock or post-punk kit stuff that I love, mixed with this programming and finding sort of the sweet spot where they were complementary and not living in different, wings of the house from each other.
Yeah, it's a fantastic opening song. The other song, which was kind of fascinating for lots of reasons, is the third track on the album, Pronouns, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can you remember the reason or where that sort of inspiration came from?
Do you mean musically or lyrically?
Both, yeah, the idea lyrically.
That's okay. So I'm thinking back now, and I think I had the beat for it, which was just this nice little, there's something almost Latin about the like rhythmically happening there. And again, it's this nylon string guitar that I like to write on that's sort of holding it down. Um, and I think I think that line, like a woman, like a woman, like a woman,
Mm-hmm.
was it may have started as a placeholder. Oftentimes excuse me, as I'm working on vocals, it'll start off as phonetic, like what feels right in my mouth or what sings naturally. So it'll be more vowels and consonants rather than super coherent words. But there's a song, bringing it all back to the band X. Um, there's a song off of the album Wild Gift by X called Universal Corner, I think is the record. And it's one of my favorite songs off one of my favorite records of all time. And there's a like a woman refrain in it that Exene sings. And so I'm sure without even being aware of it, I was just, it's just in the DNA. So this like a woman thing popped out. And
Right.
and and at the time, there was so much pronoun obsession, especially here in Los Angeles, especially having like a teenage kid where like everybody's changing their pronouns in his world every month. Like we used to, one month you're punk and 6 months later you're goth and then you're, whatever, jangle pop, who knows. They were like changing their pronouns. And to me, sort of like an old Gen Xer, it just seemed so silly and unnecessary. It's like be whatever you want. Be all the things you are. You don't need to put a label on all of it or even any of it. But if that's what you want me to call you, great. So I think we were super deep in that moment, sort of that cultural moment. And so the title Pronouns popped out, which part of me was like, generally, I'm not particularly political or controversial in my lyrics. It's usually much more personal and from dream realm. So I was like, oh, is that going to piss people off? And then I was like, I don't care. It's not saying anything. It's just what's going on. It's just what's in the ether right now, So I let it in. And then it led to all of those other fun lyrics. And I remember I just had one session one night where there was just like a stream of lines that just wound up coming out. And I just had this big, digital toilet paper roll of just lines that I could sing in between like a woman, like a woman, like a woman.
Right.
And they gradually whittled down into something that, again, both felt fun and provocative, but in a playful way, but still like playful and personal to me, so that's how that song popped out.
God, no, it's interesting because obviously I'm of that generation a little bit who gets a bit confused about what's all this about. So I was kind of interested. I was listening to the song and was just kind of curious on your take on it. And I mean, like I said, it's the whole album, works beautifully. Did you take much time putting the track listing together and sort of working out where they kind of fit and how they
sequencing is always. It's a crazy dance.
Yes, and you finished with "On My Tongue." Was that a track as well that
that was the very first one that I wrote in the collection.
Right.
And by the time I was done with the record, I was like, does this fit anymore? And I felt like I wanted to put it on the record because I like the song. And but I felt like the writing and sort of like the vision for the record got richer and deeper and more complex the further I went into it. But I wanted to like honor the complete cycle, and it just it just didn't fit into this, or it's not that it didn't fit. It did fit into the sequence, but it felt like it just busted up the flow anywhere else. And so I was like, oh, I'll put it as a sort of, you know, what is it, Her Majesty on Abbey Road, right?
Yes.
As a sort of little Her Majesty like end thing with a like the album's over, there's a little bit more of a pause, and then you get kind of the prime mover for the whole project at the end.
Nice. God,
Yeah.
it's a kind of a fascinating process, isn't it, as well?
Yeah,
So when
so
did
fun.
you decide to play some live dates with the band? When did this sort of come about?
Very interesting. So Nathan, the Epic Records era guitar player for Shudder to Think, so the second player for Shudder to Think, he married or I don't know when they got married, but they got together at the end of the 90s. Nina Persson from the Cardigans.
Oh, yes. Still on Nina, yes.
And so he's been living in Sweden for like the last 20, some odd years. And, Nina is like a huge rock star there and in other places. And so I think because Shudder to Think and subsequent solo projects for all of us, have been like on a relatively small scale, like sub rock stardom,
Yeah.
not enough to like feed a family. Um, I think maybe he felt a little like, well, that era of my life is done. Maybe people didn't appreciate it quite in the way that we had hoped. But they have a son who's 14 years old named Nils. Just going to publicly thank Nils here. Nils is like a total guitar shredder, really into the heavy stuff, and super like deep into Shudder to Think. And I honestly think that combined with some health stuff, like we've been talking about, like my heart stuff and cancer stuff, Nathan had some strange health stuff that I think combined with Nils's passionate interest in our band really like gave Nathan like sort of a renewed openness to working together again. And for me, like every couple years, I would just sort of send a smoke signal up to the band being like, I got all these songs, I got all these ideas, I want to make a documentary, and like, why don't we just blah, 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 blah. And everybody very sweetly would be like, oh, yeah, 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 maybe someday we'll see. All quite cordial.
Yes.
And over the years, Nathan and I worked through a lot of our old Michigas. And I think we were all just in a place of adulthood, really, where we loved and respected each other. And that the only reason we weren't working together was logistic. We were sort of all flung to the four corners. Um, and then recently there was just a series of things like Adam Wade, the drummer, kind of sat me down and he's like, all of our friends are doing reunion tours and they're getting to like go play Primavera and they get to go to Japan and like, why aren't we working on new music? We're everybody except, blah, blah, blah. And then our new bassist, Jarek Bischoff, because Stu, our old bassist, lives down south and was a little too far away to participate. So he sort of gave us the blessing to work with Jarek, who's part of my extended musical community. We compose scores together. He's a wonderful composer, arranger, and songwriter. He and I have this improvised band called Flesh Car together. And he has a nephew who's super into Shudder to Think, who's like 20 years old.
Right.
So he texted me. He's like, "Hey, when are you going to do a Shudder to Think reunion and I'll be bass player?" So all of this stuff just like fell into place. And I don't know. And it was like suddenly we were doing it again. And so what we decided was, let's get in a room together and see how it is and keep it real low to the ground and real organic and low key and loving and friendly, and not put the cart before the horse because we don't want to scare the horse.
No.
And so we all got in a room and pretty much instantly was like, oh, whoa, this is really good. And, so now we're back in action, whatever that looks like for the future.
And you did some rehearsals and then you played a few dates.
Yeah.
And
we didn't have the dates planned. We were like, let's just get in a room and see even if this is a thing. And then if it feels like a thing and we want to play a show, we'll just do a friends and family thing. And then word got out about that. And then that became a couple sets. And now it feels like a...
And on the new material, is it new material that you've started sort of pinging ideas about between you and Nathan or the rest of the band?
Well, so I have I have multiple Shudder to Think folders because my phantom Shudder to Think limb writes Shudder to Think parts and songs a lot of the time.
Yes.
So I sort of kept them aspirationally nearby at hand. I personally never felt like we broke up. For me, and the way I would always describe it whenever discussing it, including in interviews, was we hit pause. Who knows? It always felt to me like unfinished business, both creatively and interpersonally. So I was, I've always sort of had it at the ready. Like I keep that little coin purse close,
Yes.
And so I have a lot of ideas. We do have some really cool ideas that we're working on when we hit pause, which I think will revive and see where they lead. And then there's new stuff that we just started working on, just whatever came up in the room that felt, again, that sort of made us giggle and or tingle. And I have this nice recording studio now. So
is Nathan still based in Sweden?
He's still based in Sweden. They're moving back to New York at the end of the summer, so it's going to be much easier.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
Blimey, have you had some offers for any summer dates, or is that a bit too early for the band?
No, I mean we really just started talking with our booking agent just within the past few days. I mean, again, we're really trying to approach this in the most sane. Adult is the wrong term, but in a way that really suits all of our lives and all of our like the ways in which we would all like to live happily, healthily, and sensibly. And so we're only just now starting to talk about shows, when, where, what. We're definitely making a new record, but there's no pressure because like Nathan has a nice recording studio in New York. I have a really nice recording studio here in Los Angeles. So wherever we want to be, we can just like hang out, hit record whenever a new idea comes up, and then, share sessions and work them out in the room separately in sort of all of the modern and old-fashioned ways without getting too into each other's hair.
Yes. God, it's going to be fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
I don't
Yes, it's like, blimey, it's very exciting time. It must have been amazing for your friends and family to see you all playing live again.
It really was. It was quite cathartic. It was beautiful for us, for the people who were there. I wasn't sure. I was like, the kind of singing I do now is so different from Shudder to Think singing. I wonder what my voice will sound like. And Nathan had the same thing with guitar. He was like, the kind of playing I do is so different now. I haven't played rock guitar in a very long time. The second we got in the room, it was like muscle memory. It's the original thing. It was just all right there.
Right. My God. Did it feel like quite a God, this has been good for my soul, spirit,
Yes.
karma, just to sort of connect again. To think,
Yes.
I'm glad we're doing this because I kind of need it as much for my own health and healing as anything.
We all needed it. We all needed that visceral in the room together, the 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 force and the heaviness, the transcendence, that transcendent, loud, beautiful music thing, which we all get all different kinds of transcendent, satisfying group experiences, but not that, not the all for one for all, really bad jokes in the room, stinky boys making loud music and really working it out together. And I feel like the fact that we've taken these years to um, work through old kinks in our personal and working relationships um, has just been really beautiful and really worth it, you know.
So after that get together or meeting, do you sort of feel that there's kind of not only your old material that's there for with Shudder to Think, but potentially new material that will?
Oh, the new stuff. It's really exciting. So we had one new song that was in a place where we felt like we could perform it live. There's a lot of things that are sort of in various states of, undress. Um, and so we sort of just threw it in as the last song of the set. And you know how it can be.
Yes.
Old bands trying new songs on old fans. Um, I got so many people texted and talked to me afterward and left notes online just being like, dude, the best song you guys played was the new song. Like it just
Excellent.
feels vital. It's got classic elements with things that we couldn't possibly have done then. We're not trying to rehash anything, but it naturally taps into that sort of like Shudder to Think lexicon. It's just apparently what we do when we play together.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
God,
it's
there's
really
just a
cool.
cosmic energy, isn't it, really?
Yeah, very much.
It's gonna be so exciting.
It's gonna be really fun.
Well, I'm so pleased. Well,
Yeah.
thank you ever so much for your time.
It was so nice to talk to you.
Yes, God, it's been fascinating. I mean, it's lovely, kind of hearing your new solo album as well, and
Thank you.
realizing what the band will be like as well. Because I had no idea.
Yeah.
I just saw
I
that
mean, we don't totally know either. We're also filming everything. Like, we have so many friends in film and there's so much crossover. We're like, well, let's document this and make something out of it. We'll see what that's going to be. We want to do it in a Shudder Think way, not in like a sort of a talking heads talking about the way things used to be, but something like vital and new and
Yes.
visual. We'll see.
God, it's going to be. I just think it's a lovely process. As one gets older, you realise kind of just that importance of taking a breath and taking the moment and being there in
Yeah.
that sort of space and not somewhere
Yeah.
else. And I think and it's lovely those kind of connecting with relationships that feel like it would have been okay. It just gets diluted and we move on and whatever. But sometimes it's just so important to have that conversation again, just to sort of, sometimes you don't even need to say anything, but you just know that you're both feeling like, God, I'm really pleased that we've got this moment again, that we can just
So
connect.
pleased. So beautiful. Everybody was feeling that way too. And
Yes.
and our pal Clint Walsh, who just a wonderful guitar player and human, is also playing guitar in it, which is really, really nice. It sort of frees me up to you know, to kind of get my lead singer on a little bit.
Nice. Get your inner
Dance and prance around the stage. Help out Joe.
It's so important to dance and prance, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. I know, we've got it all there. A massive thank you to Craig for giving me the time for that interview. This has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can. On all the social media platform sites, just, go to your search engines, put in C86 Show, David Eastaugh, and you'll find me. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and various other ones. So that's it. Have a great week. Stay safe.